All right. Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to another future-focused live Q&A. I am Christopher Lind, and if you haven't been to one of these before, I am running down three of the biggest topics in the hemisphere of business, tech, and people, and answering. I've got three questions from each topic that I've curated from my community of folks. And then I'm live, so you can ask questions along the way. I'm doing it a little earlier today than usual, but I hopefully you find some value in it. So to give you an idea, I also have a podcast that drops on Monday. This is different than that. One of the topics from today, I'll do a deeper dive on next week. But the three topics I'm going to focus on today that I got questions around was one, PwC released a CEO survey revealing a bunch of data about how companies are doing in terms of AI and whether they're seeing a return on that. So I'll share a little bit about that. There's a lot of noise right now about Ring cameras and Ring cameras being used by ICE, and should you get rid of your Ring camera and all of that. There's a lot of confusion around that. So before you go out and smash your Ring camera, let's hear me out, and I will talk about what's actually going on with Ring and the mesh surveillance network and how that works from a AI standpoint and even just security, so you just understand what you're dealing with. And then the third one is the revenge of kind of the blue collar, which Alex Karp, if you don't know, I can't remember if he's the CEO or co-founder, whatever. He's up there with Palantir, which that's controversial in and of itself, but there's a thing circulating around that's basically saying, anybody in the white collar space is doomed and AI is going to replace everybody. It's kind of the same narrative. But if you actually dig underneath what he's saying, he says some crazy stuff, but a broken clock is right twice a day. And some of the things he's talking about are legit and things that people should keep in mind. So with that, let's jump into them. And like I said, if you have questions along the way, go ahead and ask. I don't mind one bit. Even though I've got my 9, I'm happy to answer things. So the first one is this PwC report that just came out. They talked to or polled 4,000, I think, something CEOs from around the globe. And they asked, how are things going amidst many things, but one of them had to do with AI. And are people seeing success with AI? Are their companies improving? And really what they were looking at is, are you seeing growth in revenue or reduction in costs? And those were kind of the big ones. And then they asked some follow-up questions. And what's going around is that in the report, it says that 12% of companies are winning big time, 33% are in the green, and everybody else is either stagnant or not, which is a big improvement from last year. I'll give it that. But it's creating a ton of FOMO for senior leaders in organizations who are already under a ton of pressure to do a ton of stuff with AI. And this is one I'm talking about in more detail next week. And I actually got off a call today with the CEO to go, just be ready, because your board's gonna start pressuring you to do more with AI. Now that PwC says 33% of companies are increasing revenue and reducing costs with AI, and it's not the full story. And anyway, needless to say, tune in next week. I'll drop the podcast on Monday and the article on Wednesday, where I'll go deeper. But I do have a couple questions related to it that I wanted to talk about, because it is interesting and there is some good stuff coming out of it. So the first question was, the data does show, and let me see. I think I've got the image right here. So let me pull it up for those of you who are watching. So this is the chart that everybody's talking about right now, which I know it's small for those of you watching on landscape view. And if you're on Substack, you can't see it, but it's basically like a 9 box. And, the 33% is up in the top of who's winning and who's not. And then the red is like people who are either just stagnant or they're losing in one of 2 areas. And I'd say about 55%. So the question that somebody asked me was, about 55% of companies are seeing nothing. They're spending more money, but they're not making more money. So they're coming out net, or they're making more money, but they spent money and they came out neutral, or the opposite of that. And so the question is, 12% are winning big, as in revenue's up and costs are down. 33% are seeing one of the two. And so the question was, are we seeing the death of experimentation and the rise of kind of like you're all in or nothing for business leaders? And this is actually why I'm spending more time talking about it next week. Is the risk right now is that this is going to create a lot of FOMO, where it's going to be you got to be in on it. You got to be going all in on AI and all this stuff. And I want to push back against that because I don't think the report is actually telling the complete story. There's another chart, which I won't pull up, that people are feeling better about AI, at least at the senior levels, but they're missing some of the key ingredients. And the analogy I use today is it's like if you went to somebody's house and you're like, I'm so excited I baked a cake, and then you found out like they didn't have flour or sugar. And so you're kind of going like, you feel good about the cake you made, but you're missing flour and sugar. Like what exactly did you make? And how are you sure that it's going to be delicious if those ingredients are fundamentally missing? And so I think the risk right now is there's going to be a lot more pressure in 2026 amidst other reasons to go all in on AI. And what I will say, what it is the end of the era of is kind of going, we're just going to wait and see. We're just going to kind of kick back and wait and see what happens. I think that's actually a very dangerous place to be in, whether you're a senior business leader or even just an individual. And what I'm not saying is that everybody should go all in on AI or be using AI for everything. In fact, that's one of the biggest things I push against, despite the fact I do a ton of AI advising, is that AI is not for everything. It's not the same for everybody. And in some cases, it will actually cause real harm if you bring it into place. So should you go all in on it? No. However, with data like this and enough use cases starting to grow, showing that it can be used effectively in the right places and it can improve things, whether it's for your business or for you individually, to not at least have intelligently been experimenting or thinking through, like, where might we? That, I think, we're the death of that age is here. And you, on the professional side, if you go, yeah, I'm not touching it, I'm not even considering it, that is a dangerous place to be in. If you are saying I'm not using it, you have to have at least done the work of saying, here's what I've considered, or here's what I've tried, here's what I haven't found value in. But I honestly would say in any profession, I think you would be hard pressed to at least not find some areas where it could help with stuff that maybe you don't need a ton of time on or is super low risk. So I would actually say, I would challenge anybody who goes, AI has zero place in what I do. I mean, if you're Amish, I guess you don't even have access to it. So there you go. But I think the age of like, I don't even experiment or I don't know anything about it, I'm just staying away and I'm waiting and seeing what happens. I think that is a dangerous place to be. I do not think that just because PwC came out and showed that 33% of companies are winning with AI, that means you should just blindly turn on and charge down the road. And like I said, I had a meeting, 2 separate meetings this week, one with the CIO and one with the CEO. And we were talking this through to kind of, I told them, like, be prepared. This report's coming. Your board is going to be on your back about AI. And we need to get clear on how you're thinking about it. 2026 is the year to at least have a position and a plan on how you're thinking about it. That's what I would say is what this is. But don't buy into the, we got to get on it or we're missing out. I promise you, I don't know which companies reported the 33% improvements thanks to AI. What I am seeing, and I talked about this last week with the whole Grok situation, is there are lots of companies that are getting a short-term boost as a result of AI, but they are taking on ethical or legal debt, and not literal debt, but like they're making bets, not understanding the unintended consequences of what they're doing with AI. And I can already assure you that there are lots of companies that are taking on debt, and they're taking it on at predatory interest rates. And when the bill comes due, they're going to quickly discover they lost more money than they made. So that 33%, I will just tell you right now, is misleading. So if you start hearing that number thrown around, 33% of companies are winning with AI, take it with a grain of salt. But at the same time, this is the year to kind of at least be thinking about, like, hey, how am I thinking about where might we experiment? What are we doing? Don't kick it down the road and go, we're waiting and seeing. That'll put you behind. So something else that came out of this report was that CEO confidence is at a 5-year low, which does not surprise me. Now, this is not specific to AI, but it's only at 30%. So CEOs of these 4,000 CEOs, the confidence rating is very low. And so the question that I got asked is growth off the table for 2026? So if you're a business leader, should you just plan on like 2026 being a flat or in the red year? And then the question was, does AI shift from being a magic wand for innovation to just a ruthless cost cutter? And this is, I started the year with a report on this, or on a podcast on this, because SaaStr, I think is the company's CEO, was making headlines about how he'd eliminated his whole sales organization with an agent. And what I said was, he's going to, that's one of those like debts he's going to take on. He's going to pay it back with interest big time. So I think, again, a risk. And I think to any senior leaders who are listening to this, be very careful, because yes, confidence is low for lots of reasons. I don't get into politics. I don't get into the whole geopolitics of things on this. It just gets too intense. But there are lots of reasons why things are unsteady right now. And I don't need to say them. I think anybody who's paying attention to anything knows why it's so uncertain right now. So CEO confidence is low. That is dangerous territory, in that you make bad decisions when you are nervous or you're feeling pressure. So I think to senior leaders, I think you do need to be careful that you don't look to AI to be a ruthless cost cutter. That I will firmly say, that if you're looking for AI to just come in and trim costs, it's not that it can't in certain areas where you might be able to shore up efficiency or maybe streamline. But what I would say, and the CIO I was talking to this week, what we were talking about is not AI, but I mean, I guess it's a kind of AI, but just basic automation can help with some of that cost reductions. There's ways to trim costs, to improve efficiency, things like that, versus just like, hey, let's bring AI in and we'll eliminate a bunch of jobs. But I think the pressure is there. And so to the senior leaders who are facing that pressure, I would encourage you not to just cave to it, because in terms of taking on debt you're not going to be able to pay back. That is one way you do it, is you cut a bunch of people, you lose a bunch of your smart, intelligent people who are capable, and now you've replaced them with AI, which is not terribly capable, can't grow, can't develop, doesn't have, you can't move it around and do different things. And so do I think the risk for 2026 is that there's going to be a lot more companies who are desperately clinging to AI to cut costs? Yes. Do I think that's a smart move? No. I think it's a very foolish move, and have worked with enough orgs where there's better ways to do it. Now, the whole doom and gloom, is 2026 going to be a terrible year for everybody? No. There are companies who are already doing really well. I think one of the biggest challenges for 2026 is the vibe in the air right now is, and I hate that this is the vibe. The vibe in the air right now is, hey, you can get away with things you didn't used to be able to get away with, so why not? One of the ones that I just shook my head at is, the former mayor of New York's like out flipping a rug pull crypto coin scam. Like, so there's a lot of pressure to just dip on ethics. And I'll just say, I don't think that's a good idea, period. That's taking on bad debt right there. So pressure's high. Yes. Temptation to take the low road, to cut corners, to use AI for stupid cost-cutting methods is high. Yes. But I would not advocate that people actually do it. So that's where I would stand on that question. All right. Question number 3 related to this PwC report. The high flyers, okay, that's in this quadrant right here, the green group, the high flyers that are seeing better margins. What is one technical trait those leaders have that the laggards are missing? Here's what I will say to that one, because it's a fair question. So the ones who are in that group. Now, that 12%, I would say, I guarantee by the time we actually cut into it, it's probably not even 12%. But anyway, I will just say universally, with all the people that I work with who are succeeding and doing well with AI, the word I use is surgical. They're doing surgical AI use. That's just, they're being very intentional. They're being thoughtful about it. They're assessing risk. They're using it to amplify what people are already doing or reduce work that is not value add type of a thing. It's not coming in and, being reckless or throwing it, wherever they can, that kind of thing. So in terms of what is one technical trait, they're actually taking the time to understand the work and the risks associated where they're applying AI and not being reckless with it. That would be one thing. And that does take some technical skills, because you actually have to be able to do requirements gathering and actually assessing, actually going through a technical assessment of a product to decide which one there is. So there's some real technical capability behind that. But it's honestly more like critical thinking and business process analysis work than anything else would be what I would say to that. Because at the end of the day, as a preview for what I'm talking about next week, the day of what's your AI strategy, quite frankly, needs to go the way of the dinosaurs. There's no such thing as your AI strategy. There's just your business strategy. And then where does AI fit into that mix? And I would say that's what people need to make the shift in 2026, 2024, 23, 25. Those were the years of we need an AI strategy. And everybody's running around making PowerPoint decks about their AI roadmap and what they're going to do with AI. And none of it had anything to do with what their business did or, what their projects were. And there's still lots of people doing it, to be fair, but it's a catastrophic mistake. And at some point, especially this year in 2026, where pressure's high, margins are thin, things are uncertain, it is not the year to be messing around like that. That's Christopher's perspective on that one. Okay, so let's transition to topic number 2. And here's my ask, because I recognize this one could go off the rails real quick, because I'm going to bring up the whole ICE conversation. And, and I'm not talking ICE as in the storms that are rolling through the US right now. So I don't want this to turn into a debate around ICE. I don't want this to turn into politics or anything like that. But I want to address this kind of viral trend right now that it's got grains of truth in it, but it's not quite what people think. So here is the clickbait kind of narrative right now. There's a ton of short clickbaity videos going around saying, run out, smash your Ring cameras, because Amazon gave ICE access to Ring cameras, and they can now see what's on your Ring camera without your consent. And so go smash them, because that's how it's being used right now. There is some truth to that. Okay. And I will address the truth to that. However, it's not quite what it's being presented as. And I want to talk about the more subtle and systemic risks of it, and how, what can you do in the interim, but then also just some things to be thinking about as more and more people, as more and more people start to think about, I don't know if anybody was at CES 2025 this year or 2026 this year, but one of the big things is smart homes. I mean, and it's been a big thing for a while, but everything's let's hook our houses up. Let's make our locks, smart. Let's make our lights smart. Let's put cameras everywhere. Let's make everything digital. Our oven can talk to our phones, and then it can order groceries from the fridge. You're like, what the actual heck is going on? So I want to talk about kind of the subtle systemic issue of surveillance mesh and just some of the risks of smart technology that most people just don't understand. And so they hear a headline like go smash your Ring camera, and either they get very angry, like some of the people in the comments, which I said, I'm not here to talk about ICE and get into things, but they either rage out or they flip out and freak out. And neither of those things are helpful. Okay. So essentially what happened in October of 2025, and this should matter to you regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum. So you can sit and rage in the comments all you want, but this matters to you either way because it's where technology is. Ring partnered with Flock Safety. Okay. That's the license plate reader network that the police use. Okay. Ring, I believe, it's owned by Amazon, and Ring partnered with that as part of kind of the police network to be able to do more so that they can, get video footage when things happen and they can pull different things together. And you can opt in. Currently, it's an opt-in thing where if you have Ring cameras, and I don't know if it's default opt-in or not, so don't, blow me up on that. I don't know if it's default opt-in or not, but there is a thing where you can say, yes, share my Ring footage with the Flock network. Okay. That's all. And so it enters the Flock ecosystem, which technically ICE has access to that. So ICE can go into that, and via interagency sharing agreements, they can, if you've opted into that with a Ring device, can pull that. It's what is being called the surveillance mesh. And what it has to do is, and this is where people get really legitimately confused, and understandably so, because all these companies come out with new products and they have subsidiaries and all these different things, and it's hard to know who owns what. And so you hear certain things and you don't fully understand. And so you'll hear something like Ring automatically has access to this stuff. And you're like, well, wait, does it? But wait, who owns Ring? And wait, what policy is it? And what does Flock have to do with this? And the pieces start getting really mixed up. And so this is kind of the surveillance mesh issue as more and more people end up with smart devices in their home that are owned by other companies that have data sharing agreements with other companies. And maybe they didn't when you bought it, but then they get acquired. And so those data sharing agreements get shared. Then new settings get rolled out into devices. You didn't realize your data was being shared with XYZ company because they weren't owned by this company when you bought it, and things like this. And so it gets really messy really, really quick. And so the problem is the opt-in defense is starting to crumble because it's really not fair to say, well, you opted in. And it's like, well, when did somebody opt in? And did you make them aware of the new acquisition that incorporated a whole bunch of new data sharing that, now your data is being shared? And like I said, this isn't a political issue all you want, because every single person I know is terrified of their data being shared with some organization. They're like, if you're on this side of the fence, you're terrified of your data being shared with this organization. If you're on this side of the fence, you're terrified of your data being shared with this organization. So this affects everybody. It's not just Ring and ICE. This has to do with anybody who has any smart devices. You should pay attention to this because you really don't know who has your data. And this is where it's getting really, really messy, because companies like Palantir and some of these other companies who are part of these bigger subsidiaries are getting access to all of your data through these kind of loopholes of like, well, you opt in 10 years ago on this one company that's been passed around to 30 other companies that then acquired your consent because you were technically opt in when they bought it. So they got access to it. And so it becomes very, very, very difficult to understand who actually legally has access to your data and who actually can use it, who can sell it, who can market to you, who can go through your internet history and your chat logs and all this other stuff. And it gets really, really, really messy. And companies notoriously, watch your email. You'll get an email that says, hey, we've updated our terms and conditions. And, most people just delete the email. They don't pay any attention to it, not realizing, oh, this company just got sold to Google or whatever. And, oh, Google also happens to have a partnership with, this company who they have data sharing agreements, and this is where it gets really, really messy. Okay. So this is why I wanted to focus on it, because people do tend to freak out when they hear this stuff, and it's because they don't understand how all these things come together. So the questions I curated from the community related to this. So the first one was, we used to think privacy was about checking a box. Like, as long as you checked a box, that's how you either did or you didn't. Now these private networks like Ring, Flock, all these different Google, like all of them, it's not that. They're merging with federal agencies, they're merging with government agencies, they're merging with private companies. It's not even just a government thing. Private companies are buying and selling your data left and right. So is the concept of consumer, the person asked the question, is the concept of consumer debt or consumer consent officially dead? In some ways, yes, in terms of if you choose to have smart devices in your house, you do need to recognize no matter how good you are at reading terms and services, no matter how good you are at, being really like to some degree, you are surrendering privacy. It's a trade-off of the convenience that comes with smart technologies. I'm not saying I support that. I don't think that just because you buy an internet connected device, you should be allowed to be surveilled all the time. I think it's terrible that we're at a state where, if you got a smart device in your house, pretty much there's a ton of companies that can just listen to what you're doing and sell that data. I hate that. However, I don't know, as more and more of these companies move things around, as their terms and conditions get more, murky, especially here in the US where we seem very determined. I had a conversation yesterday with somebody who was very adamant that there should be no regulation whatsoever on technology, none. And I'm like, well, I mean, then don't be upset when your stuff gets exploited and when you get taken advantage of. So to some degree, consent, yeah, it's not dead, but it's moving. In some cases, it's not, well, I bought the device, so now I'm trusting the company to protect me. It's one of those things where you're like, well, I mean, if you're going to have a smart home and you want the convenience of a fridge that can order your groceries and, a camera system that lets you see everything going on in your house from your phone, then recognize you're kind of consenting that more than just you has access to that. So if you're fine with that, okay. I mean, and if you're not, then don't do it. And I think that's where, as I looked at some of the big things at CES, I'm like, well, yeah, if you think you can't have your cake and eat it too, I guess is the best way I would put it when it comes to smart devices. If you want hyper convenience and you want something that can tell you everything about you and knows what you need and does everything for you and all this other stuff, then you do have to kind of accept, all right, well, then that requires, not only does it require the company who sold you the product to have a ton of data on you, but just know that the way these mesh networks are set up, you're opting into countless other companies also having access to that data. And you can be mad about it. You can kick your feet. You can stomp, like whatever. But it's like, well, but that's the cost of the convenience that comes with it. Like I said, I'm not saying I support that. I personally think we need to have more data protection and more regulation around how technology companies can operate. But under, the current circumstances, and honestly, a lot of people's idea of not understanding this stuff, it's like, well, I don't know what to tell you. Everybody wants to have the convenience of all the technology that knows everything they're doing and can give them everything they want and all this. And then they get pissed off when, people have access to their data. And it's like, well, I don't know. And Nick, I see your comment. It is relevant. I mean, your point there is relevant. And this is the kind of thing, like even your VR headsets, there's a reason the tech companies want everybody wearing wearable devices. They need world data. They ran out of data from the internet. They now need us to go around with cameras everywhere, and they need to see and listen to everything. And that's their goal. And again, if you decide that's what you want that convenience, then you have to accept the trade-off. And just because, well, I didn't agree to the terms of service, too bad. Like, then the product won't work. Or, well, I agreed to the terms of service back then. I didn't know they were going to be sold to this company who was going to sell my data to, a predatory company in XYZ country. I didn't approve of that. Well, that was outside of your control. And And I think this is going to raise a lot of concerns as more people are wearing wearable devices. These smart glasses are all the rage, and CES had more always on devices everywhere. And unfortunately, this is no longer even like, are you consenting to it? Because, well, you might not even consent to it, but the dude sitting next to you on the bus, he might have consented to it, and he's wearing always on glasses, and his glasses are catching your recordings and what you're saying, and he's looking at you, and they're picking up facial recognition data. And like, I don't know what to tell you other than there's not really a way to kind of like opt out, other than just to be really, really mindful of the products you buy, to really think critically about what are you getting for the convenience that you think, is it really that important to be able to, see everything going on in your house via your smartphone inside 24/7? Like I don't know what you do. So like, I guess whatever. It's the same thing with, people who talk to AI products about like all their inner thoughts. And I'm like, you do realize that's all stored on servers that can easily be, that are visible to the companies, and they have to save it. So even if you're like, why use an incognito chat? Well, it doesn't matter because legally they have to save it. So like, anything you're doing around and on digital devices, just know that data is not secure. And so you just have to be really intentional about it, I guess, is the best thing I can say. And like I said, it's not that I agree with it. I don't support it. I think we need to do more, but there's a lot of people in power and a lot of people who aren't in power that seem insistent that any sort of regulation or safety protection is ridiculous. And it's like, well, okay. And people feel that way until they're the ones who are exploited by it. And then suddenly they care about it. But by that point, it's like, well, it's kind of too late. So the activists on this one, they're like, smash your Ring doorbell. And yet crime rates and like even package theft is a real concern. And the number of, things that get caught because Ring cameras catch stuff. Like, so the question they had is, how do we have a nuanced conversation about community safety without accidentally building and the way they worded it is funny, building a federal panopticon. This is, I think, one of the biggest problems with how polarized and divisive everything is right now. Even Plump Giant or whatever, who was on my comments earlier, like when everybody just flips out and flies off the handle the second you say anything. I talked about an article related to Grok and the deepfake issue, and somebody got into it about like something that was just completely unrelated to it. And it's when we can't even have a civil conversation around like, hey, let's talk openly and honestly about some of the risks and trade-offs of data protection and privacy. When you can't even have that conversation without somebody calling you a name or freaking out or like, well, that's the problem. So how do we have that conversation? Honestly, we all start actually treating each other with dignity and respect and quit being jerks because we think somebody's thinks differently than us. If we can't do that, we won't be able to have a civil conversation about it. And we'll walk right into these traps. I mean, it's largely how we got here in the first place. Everybody was so insistent on getting what they want. They're so insistent on getting what they want. They don't even care until they do. And it's like, well, too late. You already made your whole house a smart home and opted into absolutely every product. You kind of can't go back. You don't even know the products that you have and where your data sits. So good luck. Good luck. Plus, they already trained all their AI on it anyway. So even if you ask them to purge your data file, it's already been mixed in with their training data. You're not getting it back out. So needless to say, I think we just start being better humans to each other if we actually want to be able to do something about it. If the thought of sacrificing something for the betterment of others if the thought of that pisses you off, well, then good luck. I mean, honestly, you're inheriting the world that you've created, and I don't really know how to say anything other than that. Okay, so the third question I got related to the whole Ring doorbell thing was Amazon's positioning itself as the everything store, but now it's being branded as a deportation tool. and at what point, actually, before I finish this question, so Nick, I did see your comment. Just so you know, those of you who troll, I don't even engage with your nonsense. But the question you said, somebody who is a victim of deepfakes, I mean, it's legit. Like, people are like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. It's like, yeah, right. Until, your sister or your wife or somebody, gets exploited with a deepfake. Yeah. Then it becomes real personal. You don't care about data protection and you say, who cares? I don't care if the government sees everything I do. Right. Until, something happens and your data gets leaked all over the place and your credit gets tanked and your bank gets hacked. Like, yeah, then suddenly you care about it. Nobody cares about anything until it actually affects them. And I hate that. I actually think, I think a lot of people are going to get hurt in the next few years. I think a lot of people are going to get extremely, extremely seriously harmed because of some of the really reckless behavior we've been engaging in. And everybody's like, well, I don't care. And it's like, okay, well, you're going to inherit this then. So I'm sorry, Nick, that you know somebody who is affected. I know how serious it can be. And the thing is, everybody's like, well, just don't do things and then you won't be affected. Unfortunately, that doesn't really hold up with things like deepfakes, where somebody could take a picture of you and then turn it into something. And right, like, you didn't consent to that. The person on the bus who's wearing the AI always on glasses that's recording everything, you didn't consent to that. So this whole attitude of like, well, just don't do anything. It's like, yeah, except bad actors can do things with your information that you have zero involvement in. And that's why, the arrogant attitude that like, well, I'm just so great, I'm immune to this. It's like, no, you're not. And you're actually even more vulnerable. That kind of arrogance is going to come back to bite you really, really, really bad. So anyway, so the brand risk associated with this. So Amazon, they're positioning themselves as the everything store. Now it's being branded as the deportation tool, which, again, I don't think that's a fair assessment. I don't think it's a fair assessment. The whole mesh network thing, it's not quite like that. And again, sometimes rather than take responsibility for our own decisions, like, ooh, I guess I didn't read the terms of service. Ooh, I deleted that email that told me about this new functionality. I just didn't pay attention. Instead of taking responsibility for that, we like flip out at, what other companies do. And that's not to say it's all on the users. I think companies have a much bigger responsibility than they're taking right now. So to be clear, don't think I'm trying to put the burden on everybody. But we seem allergic to taking any responsibility for ourselves. And it's kind of disgusting that, like, we do stupid stuff, and then when we get burned, we're like, well, it's not my fault. It's somebody else's. No, it's your fault. You touched the oven like that. You did it. Like, yeah, maybe the oven was not, secured, but like, you also walked up and touched. And I think it's a both and. So anyway, at what point does being part of the police infrastructure become a liability for consumer tech brands? I mean, I think it's already reaching the state where people are experiencing some of the blowback. Some of these tech companies are really starting to feel the blowback. Last week, I talked about the Grok deepfake situation. The public backlash was intense, and the global backlash was intense. And there are some very legitimate things that companies are really having to think about. Now, I think where we are currently, I don't think we're going to see a ton of accountability. I don't, at least not in the US. There's so many backdoor deals and, so many things going on. And it's so corrupt right now that I don't think currently we're going to see a lot of stuff, which is why I say a lot of people are going to get hurt. Now, I don't think this is unique to big tech. I love studying history. And if you look around, this is like what happened with the railroad industry. It happened with the oil industry. It had like the robber barons of the day. It happened with the medicinal, like that's how cocaine got into Coca-Cola. Like it's not new. It's just the new version of snake oil that's going around right now. And so, yeah, in many cases, it's going to take a while for these tech companies to really get hurt. It's going to take some time for them really to get hurt. And I think people are starting to reach a point where they are starting to wake up to this. And regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, people are starting to be pissed off that they're like, hey, wait a minute. Like, just because I bought this, I didn't say it was okay for you to sell everything that you listen to in my house 24/7 to your entire network of affiliate brands. Like, hold on. So I do think people are starting to get fed up. I do think that will lead to companies having to change their trajectory. I do think it will eventually lead to liability. And I'm involved with a lot of friends who are lawyers, and, the legal heat from some of this stuff is starting to catch up, and companies are getting nailed to the wall for some of the nonsense that they're pulling. I think we've got a long ways to go. And I think it also varies big time. It varies big time depending on what country you're in. It's going to vary big time depending on who's in charge of the country you're in. It's going to depend on how much money is flowing, type of a thing, so it's already a liability. I guess the answer to my question is it already is a liability for companies. And this is where I've spent a lot of time talking to senior leaders in the professional work I do around tech consulting. Is there's a lot of shortcuts that companies are taking right now. There's a lot of shortcuts and deals that look good on the short term that are cutting costs, boosting revenue, but they're taking on ethical debt. They're taking on some of this, like they're making shortcuts that are going to come back to burn them. And they can try and sell off brands, and they'll pull the same shenanigans that they have forever. So it's not like they're ultimately we're going to see final justice with the legal system, at least. But I think we're reaching a point where people are fed up. They are fed up. And as more and more people realize what's happening, just as an example, here's an example of a tech one that blew up really bad. If you have not heard of Honey, okay, this stupid little browser app that supposedly finds you the best deals for any sort of online shopping. Go look up, I think it's Megalag is the guy that did the thing. He did a whole deep investigation into this thing and looked at the way PayPal was harvesting people's data. They looked at like what Honey was actually capturing, how it was exploiting small businesses, how it was exploiting the influencer marketing, how it was exploiting consumers, like all this stuff. And it's blowing up and most likely going to turn into like a major multi-class action lawsuit against PayPal, which is going to cost them big time. So again, it's all fine and dandy till you get caught. And unfortunately, many companies seem determined to try and push the limits and see how far they can go before they get caught. And I strongly stand against taking that route. Granted, a lot of that's heavily influenced by my worldview, but even just my practical experience has said, you don't get away with anything. You don't get away with anything. And if you think you do, it's only because you're getting away with it now, but it will come around. Okay. So third and final, and then I'll wrap it up here, is Alex Karp, who's the Palantir CEO. He's making his rounds and it's all over the news and everything because he did this interview and he basically said everybody's going to be, a peasant in the future. We're going to go back to pushing plows and, all this other stuff. And of course, in true Alex Karp form, it's super hyperbolic and he loves to just say things to piss people off and to be extreme. And so, he's arguing basically the economic value of labor is flipping completely. And he's saying generalized high IQ knowledge, basically, anything that requires brain power is going to be replaced and is easily automated. Okay. And that, basically anybody who's doing anything with their brain is basically going to be obsoleted in the next few years. And so you're going to lose all your jobs. Now, I've got some very strong opinions on this because first of all, one, it's not backed. What he's saying is not backed by data. These tech folks who are making billions of dollars off the promise that AI is 1,000 times smarter and more capable than you, they're straight up lying to you to get you to, one, be afraid, be convinced the end is near, to buy their products. Like they're doing whatever they can. And it's because the cracks are starting to show in the foundation. The data is coming out that AI is actually largely incompetent, that it's not delivering on promises, that it's not able to do these things, and that they're heavily dependent on you. And part of why I'm convinced, yeah, do big tech companies want us to go back to the old way of doing things? Yeah. And you know why? Because they want you doing it wearing a freaking pair of meta glasses so that they can capture all the data. That's why. They're running out of real world contextual data. And so they need us people to go back to doing these manual tasks, these hands-on things, these real world things, so that they can steal the data and then come up with ways to exploit you for it. Like, that's why. That's why. Just watch the trends on wearables in the next few years, and you'll learn real quick what's behind these big tech companies. Now, the reality is I work super closely with a lot of these folks, and I can tell you right now, the tech is not what is being promised to the world. It's not. So anyway, but that's what the whole hype is right now. You know, Alex is out there saying you might as well buy a field and a plow, and oh yeah, by the way, a pair of meta glasses too while you're at it. You know, because that's where the world's going, and basically everything's going to become commoditized. And the safe path right now is to, you know, move into like trade skills. And I don't disagree that there's some real value to that. There's also a lot more nuance to his conversation than the headlines would have you say. He is talking more about, you know, the status quo, the folks that are just kind of going through the motions. And I would agree that AI, and I know my camera froze, so hang on, let me flip it. There we go. And I agree that AI can handle some of the, you know, middle tier stuff. Before I get to the questions, I'm going to try and pronounce it. Pro folk. The Meta VR, the biggest flop. Yeah. Zuckerberg and the metaverse is crashing hardcore. I think at last poll, there's like double digit people in the metaverse now. So he sank billions into it. But again, Zuckerberg got arrogant off his whole, he struck it rich with Facebook, and he thought anything he touched, he thought he had the Midas touch. And so he was convinced everybody just wanted to wear headsets and go off into a disconnected reality. And so, you know, it flopped, and he's largely finding out the same thing with his AI efforts. So I don't hold a lot of tier or stake in Zuck, other than he'll do whatever it takes to exploit the snot out of you and make money off of you. So just be aware of, you know, speaking of the mesh networks, you want to know who is keen to take as much data as he can from you for his own gain. There's somebody who's notorious for it. So anyway, sidebar. But let's get to the discussion question. So somebody's asked, they said Carp says philosophy majors are doomed and welders are the future. Is this just a billionaire posturing, or are we actually witnessing the first industrial revolution that favors manual labor over intellectual labor? So like I said, it's more complicated than just, are we going to see a complete flip of the labor market? You know, are we gonna go back to the days of, you know, AI's doing all the thinking for us and we're just serfs and peasants, just doing lay work? No. And I can tell you that because if you ask AI to do any sort of advanced critical thinking, it's completely incompetent. It's completely incompetent. Build an agent and ask it to do something that has any sort of complexity that's knowledge work, and you'll quickly watch the wheels just fly off in a million different directions in a near comical future, or in a near comical way. So do I think the whole labor market's going to flip? No. Do I think previously the labor market was over-indexed on, you know, jobs of critical thinking and, you know, white collar office jobs? Like, yeah, we were way over indexed on it. I mean, I grew up in the age where it was like, everybody's got to go to college, get a degree, and then go get a job in a corporate office. That's what everybody has to do. And that's why we have a whole generation of people saddled with a boatload of student loan debt that can't find a job because they don't like, it's like, well, how many of those folks do we need? And so I actually do think the whole apprenticeship and the trade model, I do think we are going to see a rise in that. In fact, I mean, I've got 8 kids and I talk with them regularly about like, hey, don't just buy into the belief that you got to go off to college and get some job on Wall Street. Like, maybe you want to be an electrician. Maybe you want to work on engines. Maybe you want to work in robotics. Like, there's a whole diverse suite of labor market that is rising and growing and things like that. I think something else, though, that we're going to have to see shift, that we're kind of like living in this state of cognitive dissonance, is and I'm speaking about this purely from a United States standpoint. We've largely gotten fat and happy. And as a result, we've like outsourced everything. We like, even just, I came from the Midwest, so I've got lots of friends who are farmers, and like, now we don't even want to grow our own crops. We're just going to buy it from Argentina and Brazil and import it from, Europe. And it's like, okay, well, if we keep outsourcing this, like, we're actually kind of sawing off the branch we're sitting on. So we do have to have kind of a shift in things, because as it stands right now, like, we just keep kind of like trying to outsource everything in the name of convenience. And I think that's going to have to change for us, even just to see an economic or labor shift and move out of this kind of depression of like, companies aren't hiring, companies aren't creating new jobs, companies don't want to invest in employees because they don't know even what the future holds, or if the industry that they're in right now is even going to be around, or if we're just going to outsource it to some company often who knows where that'll do it for half the cost. Like, we've got to see some big shifts before we can even start to say, is the labor market going to flip? Like, the labor market's got to change before we'll be able to have a better pulse. What I do think there is wisdom in is we've got to get away from this arrogant attitude that there's like white collar work and then there's blue collar work down here. That kind of nonsense BS is just garbage, and kind of the American dream of like, I want to grow up and be a YouTuber and live in Dubai. Like, give me a break. It's ridiculous. And so I think first we've got to kind of get over ourselves and recognize that building a trade organization, I've got tons of friends who have been very, very successful, doing jobs that, I mean, Mike Rowe, I think he was like the trailblazer with this, where it's like, you can be super successful doing jobs that nobody else wants to do. So do I think we need to elevate those and stop looking down on them? Yes. Do I think Alex Karp's point that that's what everybody's going to have to do because there's going to be nothing left? No, AI is stupid. AI is stupid. It has no context. It cannot think critically. It is nothing like what the headlines are promising. So anyway, that's my answer to that one. But like I said, there's a lot of complexity to that answer. And that's like me on the tip of the iceberg. I could probably talk about that one for a day. Okay, so the definement of a skill. So second question I got related to this one. If AI can do the thinking, coding, planning, okay, which I'm already saying it can't, but hypothetically, if if it can do all of that, does skill in 2030 purely mean the ability to manipulate the physical world? No, it does not. Yes, I think we are going to see a rise in kind of the manipulation of the physical world, but all you have to do is look at what we're doing with robotics. And we're kind of starting to move past this. We're moving past this obsession with creating human robots that, like, just from an engineering standpoint, and maybe I have too many friends who are engineers and we nerd out on this, like, building a robot that moves around and works like a human being is kind of stupid. It's not smart engineering wise. It's bipedal, like we're wobbly, like it's very difficult to recreate that. And the engineering world is quickly figuring that out. I will say Boston Dynamics humanoid robot, which really isn't, it looks sort of humanoid, but not really. Like, the engineering world is starting to move towards more like real time, like, hey, if we need something to do this thing, why don't we design a robot that's designed for that? Let's not try and make it look like a person with a smiling face, because that's stupid. We don't need it to. We just need it to move said thing from here to here. One of the coolest things I saw at CES was this thing that for construction workers, you can load it up at night with, pallets of stuff, and then just tell it where you need it moved, what floor you need it moved to, and it'll deliver everything overnight when you go home. Great use of robotics and AI, like wonderful use of it. Nobody wants to break their back moving 3 pallets worth of cement from the first floor to the 7th floor. Like, so yeah, have an AI robot just sit and do that while you go home and sleep. So I think in that sense, I actually think we're going to start to see AI start to do more to manipulate the physical world, but in very practical ways. Now, AI can't do the thinking, coding, and planning. And I think that's one of the things, and Nick, you kind of touched on this, like even real-time data analysis. I was talking to the head of BI, business intelligence at an organization last week, and we were talking about this, and they were frustrated because they'd been sold a bunch of promises about how great AI was going to be able to be at helping them know what's going on in their data and doing all this analysis and feeding them all these insights that they otherwise would miss. And they're extremely frustrated because it's terrible. It can't even get the numbers right on what it's reporting on. And we had a long conversation about how really even AI, when it comes to analysis, business analysis, and things like that, you need a person who knows what they need and then can ask AI like, hey, can you find patterns in this? Or where are the other 83 in this table of 10,000 that are this exact same pattern match? That's what AI is good at doing, which if you think about it, that's like a robot. You know what you want, you describe it, and then it goes and does it for you. So even in the intellect, but I think we're starting to realize how much more complex our cognitive abilities are. And so we're realizing like, oh yeah, like when we think, we don't just think like this, process, and then it just happens. So I think there's that. Another example with coding, I can't tell you how many heads of software development I talk to who are so frustrated because their teams spend all their time bug fixing AI code. They're like, we are underwater. We spend more time fixing mistakes. Stuff gets released and then it blows up, and we've got to clean it up, and then we got to figure out where it broke because we didn't even write the code. Like the idea that AI can do all the thinking, coding, skilling, like just throw that out the window. And I know there's always the promise of like, hey, it's right around the corner. It's right around the corner. It's like the fusion glitch, like, yeah, no, fusion, just 30 more years. We've been saying that forever. AI is the same thing. And honestly, what I can tell, and some people are like, yeah, you just say that, just watch. Okay, I will. But here's the thing. Actually, as the AI models keep advancing, it actually continues to break in more complex and more catastrophic ways. So this isn't just like, I don't believe the hype. It's, no, I'm actually involved in a lot of these things, and they're breaking down even more than they were before. So just if you're afraid AI is going to do everything, it's not, and it's not. So anyway, okay. So then the third question related to this: if vocational trade is the safe path, which I don't necessarily think it's the safe path. I think it's a very legitimate path. It's a path you should consider. It's a path that I encourage people who are, new in their careers or thinking about a, career change. You should seriously consider vocational trades. It's a very viable, very financially viable path that you can take. But what does that do to the ROI of a $2,000 or $200,000 university degree? And the question was, are we about to see a massive crash in higher ed? So here's the thing. I know lots of folks in the higher education field, and they are majorly feeling the crunch right now, big time, because people are starting to ask, why am I paying so much money to go get a college degree that I really can't even find a job at the end of it? And it's a very legitimate question. And I get asked a lot, should I go get a college degree? And my first question is, for what? Like, for what purpose? What are you looking to do? Like, what do you want to do with it? And most people they haven't thought that through. They just were told you should get a college degree. You should never just get a college degree just because. It's a giant waste of time. If you are, you need to take the time to understand what you're trying to do so you can try and decide, like, is this school this? Is it worth this? Like, there's a lot of trade-offs, and you should viably consider the trade route. And I will tell you, schools, higher education institutions, they're scrambling. Now, even before the AI boom, they were scrambling because in the corporate sphere, they were taking major heat from companies because new grads were showing up and companies are like, I'm not paying this much money for somebody because they have an MBA. They can't even tangibly do anything. And so the higher education industry was already taking some major heat from companies to do more real world skill preparation. The AI boom only further drove that, as did the economic crush of people going, wait, I have all the student loan debt and for what? So talking with deans in different schools, I actually advise a couple degree programs. And we talk regularly about, like, how do we actually tie degree programs to real world transferable skills that show up in business? How do we even if you want to stick to the white collar world, how do we actually have things where you actually move into a more apprenticeship model? I actually think the white collar world, the, whatever you want to call it, I think that world can learn a lot from the trades and can actually learn a lot from, like, because it's not just trades that you need to apprentice people. Anybody who's a good leader, at least, knows that when you hire somebody who doesn't have as much experience, the way you get them more experience is you work with them. You help transfer that knowledge. So whether you're going into project management or business analysis or software engineering, or you're going into plumbing or electricians or, whatever, like, you need people who are transferring that knowledge and apprenticing people along the way. So yes, the higher education institutions are under major fire. They are trying to figure it out. They are losing enrollments left and right because people aren't. And I saw somebody say something about, like, cut the degrees. Do we still need degrees? Yeah. I mean, we still need them. Is the whole path of, like, everybody go off to college when you finish high school, like, is that universally a good idea? No, but it never was. It never was. And I actually think it's terrible that used to be that, and in many cases it still is set as the expectation for things. So will it change? Unfortunately, most people don't change until they absolutely have to, which is unfortunate. So, as more and more higher education institutions start to vanish, in some ways it'll make the problem worse, because then the students will just go to the colleges that are left. And so they won't think they need to change, but there is pressure for them to make some real changes. And I anticipate that we will see it. And I do know some schools. I work with some higher education institutions that they're doing a really good job. So I don't want to dog on higher education, because there are some really solid programs that are being extremely innovative in the way they're driving costs down, in the way they're doing better at connecting people to jobs as part of the programs, as they're thinking more creative about skill building and diversifying what you can do and showing transferable skills versus just like, we're going to send you to school to be a this. And it's like, well, okay, that's a very narrow path. So there are some schools doing a really good job with it. Many of them aren't. But many of them are making the shift, and I think we're going to continue to see some shifts along the way. Okay, well, there you go. Thanks so much for sticking around. Enjoyed the engagement from the folks on here. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back. I do this every Friday, so and I'll see what topics come up next week. But if you don't, check out the podcast next week, where I'll go deeper on Monday on the whole PwC thing, the PwC CEO report, and talk about that. And you can read about it on Substack if you want to see that. So with that, I hope you have a fantastic Friday and a great rest of the week, and we will see you on the other side.